Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today we find ourselves back in 2008 in Zurmat, Afghanistan, in a remote district in turmoil just a few hours south of Kabul, bordered to the east by the sheer mountains where the Americans almost captured Osama bin Laden back in 2001. Now, an American infantry company sets up a forward operating base FOB outside the district center. The Afghan army is starting to patrol, drones are heard above, and the occasional jet swoops low, explosions following in its wake. Meanwhile, in the mountains of Pakistan, bearded men in secure caves are determined to stand up to this increased coalition presence. By mules, motorcycles, and camels, weapons and ammunition make their way into Zurmat. This will not be a quiet year. Zurmat is a two-player game, the coalition versus the Taliban. It takes 60 to 90 minutes to play, is for ages 14 and up, and published by Catastrophe Games. Now it's on Kickstarter right now, so I'm going to show you how the game works, and I'll see you on the other side. This is a Kickstarter preview, so all the art and components you see here are not final. These are prototype materials. To see more of what the updated components look like, check out the Kickstarter link in the description of this video. Now here is Zurmat set up. Now this game has a very dynamic setup. It's not the same every time, and the players have lots of strategy as to how the game is set up. Now one player is going to be playing on the coalition side, and the other player is going to be playing the Taliban side. Now at the beginning of the game, players are going to get these different tiles, and they're going to be strategically laying them out one at a time, and then players are also going to be placing population markers and things like that. So there's a lot of strategy that actually goes in as you're setting the game up. So even from the very beginning, before you even start, there's a lot of things to think about and a lot of consequences for those choices later on. Now at the beginning of the game, there is a forward operating base, FOB, that's in the middle, and tiles are going to be started to be placed around it. And also at the beginning of the game, that tile is going to be controlled by the Afghan National Army, or the coalition side, if you will, where two other tiles are going to be controlled by the Taliban, again, strategically placing those and things like that. And that tells you who at this point in time controls those tiles. So right now, Taliban controls two, and the ANA, I'm going to call them the coalition side, is controlling one. Now each player is also going to get their own player board that they'll have in front of them. Now each player is going to get some action cards, and they're going to place them in any order below their board. We'll talk more about this later. They're also going to get some objective cards and some tactic cards. Now the player who has the most points at the end is going to win, and points are essentially accomplishments represented by the game. Now your goal is to complete missions assigned to you by your commander, and those are represented by those objective cards. Each player gets 4 of them at the beginning of the game. You get to select 2 of them. And these are secret. You're trying to do certain things, like for every bridge tile you control, you'll get a point. Or you'll get 3 points if you conduct the most attack actions throughout the game. So not only are you getting points for your missions that are secret at the end of the game, you're also going to be getting points at the end of the game for the tiles that you control, and there's also some event cards that you'll get points from as well. Speaking of event cards, there is a deck of events, and there's also a calendar. Now the game is played over turns and different rounds. Now each round essentially is a month in the game, and by default the game will last till November, but I'll show you later it can end earlier if winter comes early. Now each of these rounds, or months, goes through 6 different phases, and the first of them is to draw and resolve an event card. So an event card will come up, and certain event cards will affect this turn. Some of them will affect next turn and this turn, and some of them might even affect in 2 turns from now. Like this one, for example. There's an election, and the side with the most declared tiles in 2 turns, which means at the end of the turns after the next turn, will get 2 victory points. So this actually goes here to let everyone know that this effect's going to be coming up at the end of 2 turns, and at the end of this round it's going to slide down, and the round after that's going to slide there. So you're constantly knowing what's going to be happening. So sometimes there's events that affect you right away. Sometimes there's some in a little bit in the future, some of them in a lot in the future, and it gives you a lot of different things to think about tactically in the game. Now the next phase is influencing the population. Now as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a setup where players are placing these population discs. Now they might look the same on this side, and they do on purpose, because over the course of the game you're going to be placing these, and you kind of have to remember whose is whose. Or if you'd like to take that element out of the game, you can always say, hey, the ones on the bottom of the tiles are the person playing on this side, and the one on the top of the tiles is the one playing on that side. However, the other player doesn't know which ones, what's on the other side of yours. You do. The back sides of these, let's take a look at them closer. So for example, this is the way you saw them on the board, but let me flip them over. So on the back side, these two are basically from the Taliban player. Now if it's blank, it's just a bluff, it's a decoy. If it has the control sign of the Taliban, then it's actually one population. And conversely, for the coalition side, this is a blank decoy, and this is essentially, one population towards them. Now, anytime players are placing one of these, they're going to draw them out of the bag. Each player has a bag that has only their types in them, but remember, the backs always look the same. And so they're going to pull these out when you place them, and they always get to look at them before they place them, but once they're placed, you don't get to look at them unless an effect in the game allows you to. So in this step, first the coalition is going to go, then the Taliban player. Now, each player is going to draw as many of those population tokens from the bag, depending on how many tiles they control. So at the beginning of the game, the coalition player can only draw one, but the Taliban is going to be able to draw two. So that player, let's say that the coalition player draws one, and let's say they place one right here, right? But then the other player is going to take them. They're going to be able to place two, and they can place them, say, on the same spot like this, or they can split them up. It's totally up to them what they want to do with that. And again, the players placing them gets to see the back, but they always get placed face down. You have to remember which ones are your decoys and which ones are not. You can also stack them if you want like this, if you want to make it a little bit easier to see the tiles and things like that. Now these population tokens are important because at different times throughout the game, we're going to check to see who has control, even if it's already controlled by somebody, or maybe a tile that isn't. And these population markers are going to add to those controls as well as units, as we'll see later. Now the next phase is to draw tactic cards. Each side gets to draw one from their deck and put it in their hand. Remember, you start with two, but you only get one of these each month, and you could play any number of these tactic cards during your turn, but you're only replacing one per month, so you gotta find the right time and the right situation to play them, especially if you're gonna be playing multiples of these. We'll go over what some of these cards do a little bit later. The next phase is the coalition actions. Now they're going to select one of the action cards. Now these cards in the final version will line up better with these numbers, but this is essentially the operational power of that. So recruit right now is at a power of 4, patrol 3, attack 2, declare 1, and construct 0. And so what you're going to do is you're going to pick one of these. Remember, this was laid out in the order that you wanted them to at the beginning of the game. So let's say we wanted to recruit. This is a power of 4. We can recruit a number of Afghan units added to the tiles that we control. So we can add 4 of them. Now at the beginning of the game, they're just controlling this one fob here, and they actually have some US units here that start the game there. So they added 4 of the coalition units there. Now when you take an action, you also place one of your cubes on that action, for example, recruit, because if you remember, some of the objectives, this one says conduct the most attack actions. So if at the end of the game, I have more cubes in the attack action than the opponent, I am going to get these 3 points. But because the other player doesn't know what your goals are, even if you don't have one of those, you still put cubes here to sort of pretend like you're going for a certain goal, and it helps you track that. Now after you've taken that action, this was a power of 4, that recruit action now slides to the back and everything pushes to the front, which means that you couldn't really do this next turn because it's at a power of 0. Now after that, it's going to now be the Taliban's action, and they will pretty much do the same thing. Then you go on to the next phase, but before I go there, let me show you what these other different actions do. So let's say we wanted to patrol, and let's say we had a power of 4. You only take one action per turn, but let's just say we hadn't taken our action yet. Now we can move units. Now let's say we take these 2, and I go 1, and you could drop them off. They patrol here. 2, 3, and let's say we just wanted to stay here. Now for each tile we moved into, which is this, this, and this, that's how many of the population discs we're going to draw. We're going to draw 3, look at them, and then we're going to place them out on the tiles that we patrolled through. And they might have been setting themselves up for these bridge tiles, because if you remember, they had a secret objective that was getting a point for every bridge tile that they controlled at the end of the game. So maybe they're starting to set themselves up for this. Now when you patrol, you can never go into an area that has the enemy units in there. You also couldn't go into where there's enemy forts, but we'll get into forts later. Now speaking of patrolling and moving, you need to follow the roads, and sometimes you might hit a dead end. If that happens, they need to stop movement right there. Now let's say it was your turn and you wanted to declare operations. This is how you try to declare the control of a tile. Whether or not it's controlled, this one is not controlled by anybody, or even if it is controlled, you can reassess that tile for control, which means it might flip control. So the first thing you do is you'll add population discs. And let's say I had a power of 3 is what I did this declare action. I will take 3 of those population discs out of my bag, I will look at them, and then I will place them on any tiles that I want. You can put them in the same, you can split them up, it doesn't matter. Then you'd get to check intel, which means you get to check any one single tile on the entire board and look at all the population tile tokens that are there, regardless of whose they are. You'll get them, you'll look at them, you'll peek. That will allow you to assess if that tile is the one that's declared this turn. You'd know, you'd have a good idea of who will get the power there, who will get the control. Then you get to choose one tile to declare, and it doesn't even have to be the one that you peeked at. So you're getting information, and maybe we're like, we looked at another one for later, and we're like, no, we know we're gonna have this one. Let's declare this. And then we're gonna see who's gonna control this. Now, we look at the different population tokens. This is one, two of them were neutral or decoys. So right now it's 1 to 1, but we have a unit here. So this gives us 1, so we're at 2. So if this is the way it was, we would have control of this, and we would essentially control this tile. However, let's say we were trying to control this, but the Taliban already controlled this tile when we were trying to declare it. And when this happened, they had control at the beginning, they have 1. Let's say we had 2 here and 1 here. This is gonna be 1, 2, 3, but there's a school here. We haven't talked about schools yet. This adds to one of the influence. So the Taliban would have had 1, 2, and we would have had 1, 2, 3. And in that case, we would have flipped control to us. Now, if it was tied, whoever had controlled it at the beginning of this would have kept control. Now then, after that's done, all neutrals are taken away and put back in their corresponding bags. And then 1 for 1, you're going to take off the population markers that are actual influence. And then you're left with whatever you're left. So it kind of like boils it back down. So now the coalition owns it here. They have control. And then we have this. They basically are going to still have 1, 2, and essentially 3 influence here. Now, another action you could take is to construct. Now, this allows you to construct a different amount of forts and or schools on tiles that you control depending on the power or the operation power of that. So let's say we had a power of 2. We could place a fort and or school on places that we control. They could be on different tiles, they could be the same tiles. You just can't have more than 2 of each of these on the same tile. Now, schools, as we already see, add to your sort of influence there when you're looking for control. The forts will help you with attacking, which we're going to go over next. Now lastly, let's talk about the attack action. Let's say it's the Taliban's turn, and they're going to attack. Let's say they have a power of 3. That tells you how many total units you can move and up to how many tiles you can move, and you must attack an enemy unit and or fort. You can't just move them around. You got to use the patrol for that. So when you're attacking, let's say they had an attack of 3, they could say, no, this one moves 1, and these 2 move 1. That's quite fine right there. Now then you would initiate combat, and you could have moved to different tiles, and you might have 2 different battles going on at once, and you would decide which one goes first. Then the attacker can play a card, and then the defender can play a tactic card. Now these cards do different things, like the defender here, you could add 3 US die to any coalition battle, for example. So in this case, in this battle, the Taliban is going to roll 3 dice, 1 for each unit, and the coalition is going to roll 2 green, because they have 2 units there, plus they're going to roll these for all the US troops, plus we had this card that could have used to add 3 more dice to any coalition battle. So they're going to have a lot of dice to roll. So even if you have more units, you'd roll these 3, you'd resolve them, and you'd roll them again. But in this case, and also they have a fort, and it's controlled by the coalition here. So we look at this, and everything happens simultaneously. This is a hit, but the fort blocked it. So these essentially cancel each other out. Now this is a hit, and this essentially blocked it. So those come out, and now this does 2 hits. And so these people get to decide who gets hit, because they might have decided to destroy a fort if they were the one that controlled the fort. So essentially these 2 are going to go away just like that. Now, of course, we would have rolled more dice here because of the card, because of these, but you keep resolving that until pretty much the combat's over. Now, normally you're just going to roll once, unless, of course, you have more units there than how many dice you have. Now, after the Taliban takes their actions, we go to the month ends, which essentially means, well, everything sort of slides. Like this one was 2 turns from now, so it's going to come here, which is going to be at the end of the next turn the effect comes, and this goes down like that. Then you start the new phase over, like drawing an event card, for example. So let's say we drew this, add a winter cube to the empty month starting at the back of November. So let's say it was like this, for example. Now, normally what would happen is if there were no winter months, at the end of this month, it would be over. However, if this was it, this would be the last month if you're November. But if this came out now, this would come here and the game would end immediately. So let's take a look at some of these other tactic cards. Like this one you play on the Taliban players' turns after they declare what action is taken, and then -1 to the Taliban's activity level when taking the declare or recruit action. This one allows you to add +2 to the activity level during your declare action. This one says you can attack the Taliban patrol with all coalition units next to the Taliban tile, adding +1 die to it. Or you can check an influence of a tile. So there's a lot of different things you can do with these tactic cards. Remember, you can play as many as you want, some of them on other players' turns, but you only draw one per month. That's pretty much how you play the game. Remember, you're going to score points by your objectives, by some event cards that happened, and by controlling tiles. Whoever has the most points at the end is the winner. Well, there you have Zurmat, and as I showed in the overview, it's a historical two-player duel that has a balance of both strategy and a little bit of luck. Now, if you'd like to see the final art and components and the different pledge levels available, you can click the link below me in the description of this video. Now, that's going to take you directly to the Kickstarter project page, and I'm sure that Catastrophe Games would love your support.